He came home early, expecting silence in his mansion, but instead heard music, laughter, and a voice that didn't belong. What he found in the shadows shattered everything he thought he knew about loyalty, family, and love. And from that moment, his life would never be the same. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The private jet touched down under a blanket of clouds, the runway lights stretching like tired eyes across the wet tarmac. Ethan Hawthorne leaned back in his leather seat, loosening the tie that felt more like a noose than an accessory. For a week, he had been trapped in boardrooms and hotels, juggling negotiations with foreign investors, deals that would further cement his position as one of the city's most powerful millionaires. By every financial measure, it had been a successful trip. Yet all he felt was exhaustion gnawing at the edges of his composure. He had planned to return home the next day, to arrive with his usual precision, greeted by his staff in the bright hours of the afternoon. That was how Ethan liked things, orderly, scheduled, controlled. But tonight, staring out at the rain-slick runway, he made a sudden decision. He wanted to go home now, before midnight. No announcement, no preparations, just silence, space, and the comfort of his own walls. The car waiting for him glided through the city's empty streets, headlights cutting through the mist. Ethan stared at the world beyond the glass, strangers huddled under umbrellas, neon signs flickering, couples laughing as they hurried into warm cafes. It felt like another planet, far removed from the sterile life he had built. He dismissed the thought quickly. Feelings had no place in his world. When the iron gates of the Hawthorne estate swung open, Ethan exhaled. The mansion loomed ahead, its tall windows like darkened eyes. It was a fortress of glass and stone, immaculate, expensive, and utterly lifeless. He had designed it to be a monument to his success, to the Hawthorne name. Yet stepping into it always felt like coming home and more like entering a museum. The driver offered to carry his bag, but Ethan waved him off. He wanted solitude, wanted to walk his own halls without anyone watching. He entered through the side door, the one near his study, expecting the stillness of midnight. But as he stepped inside, he froze. Music drifted faintly through the air. Not the sterile hum of a playlist left running, but live music, a piano, soft and tender, weaving through the halls like a secret. He frowned, every muscle tensing. He hadn't authorized any visitors. His niece's nanny had left earlier. The staff had been dismissed for the night. So, who was inside his house playing piano? And then came laughter. Light, warm, unguarded, a child's laughter, followed by a woman's gentle voice. Ethan's heart jolted, caught between suspicion and disbelief. He moved silently, subsex muted on the marble, following the sound down the long corridor toward the living room. Shadows flickered against the walls as he drew closer, the glow of the chandelier spilling into the hallway. His mind raced. Was it a break-in? Some audacious thief mocking him by filling his halls with music? Or, and the thought struck sharp, was it betrayal? Someone he trusted crossing boundaries he had set so firmly? He stepped into the archway and stopped dead. In the center of the living room, by the grand piano that had sat untouched since his late sister's death, was Clara. The young housekeeper, her dark hair pulled into a loose braid, sat at the keys, her hands moving gracefully over the ivory. Beside her, perched on the edge of the piano bench, was Lily, his orphaned niece, the little girl who rarely smiled in his presence. Tonight, her face glowed with joy, her small hands clapping in delight as Clara shifted from melody to melody. Again, Lily laughed, her voice bubbling. Clara smiled, her eyes warm. One more, but then it's story time. Remember our deal? Lily nodded eagerly, leaning against her. Ethan's breath caught, though he stayed hidden in the shadows of the doorway. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. He had never seen his home like this. Alive, filled with music and laughter. He had never seen Lily so free, her shoulders unburdened by grief. And Clara, he had always regarded her as quiet, efficient, invisible almost, someone who kept his house running without asking for more. But here she was, not just dusting furniture or preparing meals, but bringing warmth to the heart of his home. When the song ended, Clara gathered Lily into her lap, pulling a worn storybook from the side table. She opened it, her voice gentle as she began to read. Lily nestled closer, her eyelids heavy but her smile still lingering. Clara's hand brushed the child's hair back tenderly, the kind of gesture Ethan hadn't made in years, if ever. He gripped the doorframe, emotions crashing through him in waves he didn't recognize. Confusion, guilt, longing. This wasn't betrayal, it was something far more dangerous, a glimpse of everything his life lacked. And Ethan Hawthorne, the man who prided himself on control, stood powerless in the shadows of his own home, unable to look away. Clara didn't just read the story, she wove it. Her voice moved like the melody she'd left on the keys, gentle rises and falls that turned paper and ink into a small, safe world. Lily listened with the rapt focus children reserve for things that feel like rescue. When Clara paused to show a picture, Lily traced the lighthouse with one finger, then rested her head against Clara's shoulder the way she had never done with Ethan. The sight punched through him with a force he couldn't name. His house had been full for years with expensive things, yet this small circle around a piano bench was the first warm place he had seen inside it. Memories he avoided rose anyway. 2 years since his sister's accident, 2 years of probate, guardianship, interviews with nannies who lasted weeks at best. Lily had come to him shell-shocked and silent. He had responded with structure because structure was what he knew. Tutors, schedules, a wing prepared for her comfort and privacy. The house stayed spotless, the halls quiet, the staff invisible, the grief louder than the clock. He told himself time would do the softening. Time hadn't. Not for Lily, not for him. A lullaby now did what an empire could not. Clara turned a page and breathed a laugh when Lily guessed the ending. Her hands were not a pianist's hands in the way Ethan imagined musicians' hands should be. They were working hands, with fine lines from detergent, a small nick near the thumb. The piano had been dusted every week and never played. He remembered approving a maintenance note last month for its tuning and hadn't wondered who cared enough to request it. Now he knew. He studied the way her fingers hovered when Lily interrupted, as if music had become second nature, only because a child needed it to be. A soft thump startled him. He braced, adrenaline spiking, eyes sweeping the room for the source. Security systems, cameras, locks, he thought in grids, because grids made uncertainty less lethal. The sound was nothing but Lily's stuffed rabbits slipping from the bench. Clara reached down without looking and set it gently in the child's lap. Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Clara hummed the last lines of the story's rhyme, and, as she did, the melody tilted into something older. He knew it, a tune from their grandmother's records, Sunday afternoons that smelled like oranges and polish. He felt it like a door creaking in a sealed room. The lighthouse again, Lily murmured, sleep blurring the edges of her voice. Clara didn't reopen the book. She told it from memory this time, shorter, softer, a captain steering by a light he couldn't always see but trusted, anyway. The metaphor was not lost on Ethan. He wondered, with a bite of shame, whether he had been the storm in his niece's story, looming, precise, cold. He hated that the thought fit. He hated more that it made sense that warmth had entered his house by a door he never opened. Practical questions tried to claw through the change he felt. Boundaries, employment agreements, nighttime protocols. If a headline ever bent this scene into scandal, he could imagine the words. Yet the reality in front of him was impossible to mistake for overreach. Clara checked the clock. She asked Lily if she wanted her blanket or her bed. She kept her voice low and clear, letting the child choose. Nothing about it felt sneaky. Everything about it felt deliberate and kind. It disarmed him more effectively than defiance would have. Kindness often did when you never expected it. Lily's lashes lowered in slow blinks. Clara slid off the bench, gathered a throw from the sofa and tucked it around her, tucking not like a task but like a promise. There, she whispered, smoothing a curl from Lily's forehead. You're safe. Your mom loved the lighthouse story too. She said lights were people who refused to go out. Ethan closed his eyes against the sudden sting. He hadn't known that. His sister had saved her soft things for other rooms. Clara stood, picked up a toy with a bent ribbon, and fixed the bow with steady fingers before setting it on the edge of the piano like a small repaired flag. He almost stepped forward then. Habit stopped him. He had built a life on entering rooms with authority. Something told him authority would break this one. Instead, he waited, half hanging a floor lamp to make a quieter pool of light. She sat again, alone now, and let her fingers fall into a different tune. It wasn't polished. It was the kind of playing people learn because music is how they get through. Between phrases, she spoke to the room the way people do when they think they're alone. "You're okay, little lighthouse," she whispered toward the sleeping child. "And this house can be one too, even if it's cold sometimes." Then, softer, to herself, "We can make it warmer." Ethan felt the words land in places he pretended he didn't have. He thought of files with background checks, of a line on Clara's application that mentioned weekend volunteering at a community center, of a note from the household manager that she stayed late sometimes to finish things no one had asked her to finish. He realized he had read the words without letting them touch meaning. Tonight forced meaning on him. Warm wasn't an accident. It was work. She was doing it. Unpaid, unpraised, unseen. Until now. A dangerous feeling pressed at his ribs. A person who could make a home out of a house was the rarest kind of valuable. He backed into the hallway as the final notes thinned and dissolved. The house felt different, like it had exhaled. On another night, he would have poured whiskey and let the burn do the work of feeling for him. He poured water instead and tasted how flat it was, how honest. In his study, the monitors glowed with a paused presentation, profit curves climbing like mountains. He stared at them and saw a child asleep on a piano bench under a worn throw, saw a woman repairing a ribbon with her pocketed patience. He closed the laptop and the room went quiet enough to hear the rain tapping against the glass. He texted security to disregard interior motion in the East Wing for the next hour, and sent a second message to the household manager that said only, "No reprimands. We will discuss tomorrow." He rubbed a hand over his face, and the gesture felt like a man trying to wake into a different life. He replayed every glance, every inflection, every small choice Clara had made, and felt the shape of a decision forming. He would not explode into this tenderness like weather. He would not make it retreat. He would ask, and he would listen, which might be harder than any merger he had closed. Before he left the corridor, he looked back. Clara had curled on the far end of the sofa, not sleeping, just keeping watch the way tired people do when they've learned that quiet is never permanent. He noticed the neat stack of folded dish towels on the coffee table, the book tucked under the lamp for easy finding, the way she had arranged Lily's shoes together at the rug as if homing were a craft. He had always believed home was the sum of large purchases and controlled spaces. Watching her, he understood that home might be nothing more or less than the accumulation of gentle, repeated acts. He slipped away, the darkness taking him in like water. Down the hall, past his sister's framed photographs, past the polished console that reflected a man still learning his outline, he moved like someone who had interrupted a prayer and didn't dare speak. In the doorway to his room, he paused once more, listening. Faintly, through walls and distance, he heard a child's even breathing, and under it, the whisper of a house remembering how to soften. Ethan Hawthorne, who had planned to arrive to silence and control, lay awake longer than the clocks, stunned by the simplest discovery of his life. Tenderness had found a way in, and in all his years, he had never seen anything like it inside his home. The next morning, Ethan rose earlier than usual. He hadn't slept much, the echoes of piano notes and whispered stories circling in his head. His mansion had never felt so alive as it had the night before, and he could not shake the image of Clara's hands brushing his niece's hair, of Lily's laughter filling a space he had long considered permanently hollow. For years, Ethan had kept order in his home through distance. Staff handled schedules, tutors handled lessons, and he ensured Lily had everything she could ever need materially. Yet seeing Clara's quiet presence unlock what fortune never could had left him restless. It was not in his nature to leave questions unanswered. He found Clara in the kitchen later that morning, her back turned as she arranged breakfast trays. She startled when she realized he was there, the porcelain teacup in her hand nearly slipping. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said quickly, setting it down, "I didn't expect you back until this afternoon." "Came home early," Ethan replied evenly, his voice measured. "And I saw everything." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. She stepped back slightly, wringing her hands in front of her apron. "I can explain. Please, I didn't mean to." "Stop." Ethan's tone was sharp, though not cruel. "You think I'm here to fire you?" Clara bit her lip, her silence an answer in itself. Ethan studied her. Most employees he had dismissed would have already begged, defended themselves, or shifted blame. Clara stood quietly, shoulders squared despite her fear. "You played my piano," he said slowly. "You sat with Lily. You stayed long after your duties ended. Why?" The words hung in the air, heavy with suspicion and something else, something he himself could not name. Clara took a steadying breath, her eyes flickering toward the doorway that led to Lily's wing. Because she needed it. She cries when the halls are too quiet. The music soothes her, and the stories, they help her remember her mother without drowning in the loss. "I thought," she stopped, her voice breaking her kings. "I thought it was better than silent." Ethan's jaw tightened. Silence. That was the one thing he had given his niece in abundance. He glanced toward the doorway himself, suddenly ashamed. "You thought it was your place to decide that," he pressed, though his voice lacked conviction. Clara answered softly, shaking her head. "It isn't my place, but it is my heart, and I couldn't stand by while she felt alone. Not when I know what that feels like." Something in her tone drew Ethan closer. "What do you mean?" Clara hesitated, then lowered her gaze. "I lost my parents when I was 10. A car accident. No aunts or uncles waiting, no siblings to hold me. Just quiet rooms and people who came and went because they were paid to." Her voice steadied, though her eyes shimmered with old grief. "Loneliness like that burrows deep. I swore if I ever had the chance, I would never let another child feel that kind of emptiness." Ethan stood, frozen. He had never asked about Clara's past. To him, staff existed in the present, hired to perform, evaluated on performance, dismissed when they failed. Now, the woman before him was no longer a silent housekeeper. She was a survivor, her life etched with scars that gave shape to her compassion. "So you decided to," he asked slowly, "fill the role her family should have?" Clara met his gaze then, steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Not replace her family, just remind her she still has one, even if it doesn't always feel that way." The words struck harder than Ethan expected. He thought of Lily clinging to Clara's side the night before, laughter in her throat, peace in her eyes. He realized, with a hollow ache, that his niece had never clung to him that way. Clara mistook his silence for anger. She dropped her gaze again. "I'll pack my things if you want me gone. I never meant to cross boundaries. I only wanted to give her something I wish someone had given me." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. The instinct to fire, to reassert control, warred with something he could not define. He wasn't angry, not in the way he should have been. He was unsettled, shaken. Guilt clawed at his chest, whispering truths he did not want to face. A maid had seen and provided what a millionaire guardian had failed to. "You're not dismissed," he said finally, his voice rough. Clara blinked in surprise, her lips parting. "I'm not." Ethan shook his head once, sharply. "No, you'll stay, but things will be different." He didn't explain how, because he didn't know himself. All he knew was that the world had tilted, and for the first time in years, he wasn't sure of his footing. Clara nodded quietly, her relief tempered by wariness. She turned back to the breakfast tray, her hands moving with the practiced grace of someone who knew how to work through silence. But Ethan lingered, watching, his mind circling the admission she had made. For the rest of the day, he could not escape it. Her story replayed in fragments, weaving itself into the corners of his thoughts. Loneliness. Emptiness. A child left to rooms that meant nothing. He had told himself Lily would heal with tutors and order, yet Clara's truth had exposed his... That evening, as he passed the library, he paused again at the sound of Lily's laughter. Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, helping her build a tower of books into a makeshift castle. Lily's eyes sparkled with the same joy Ethan had seen the night before. He leaned against the doorframe, hidden from view, his chest tightening. For the first time, Ethan Hawthorne admitted to himself a truth he had spent years burying. All his fortune, all his walls, had never made his house a home. And it was Clara, quiet, unassuming Clara, who had reminded him what one could look like. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the breakfast room. Ethan sat at the head of the long table, untouched coffee cooling in its cup. Across the room, Lily was giggling at something Clara whispered as she sliced fruit into neat little patterns on the plate. The sound was bright, unforced, and it unsettled him more than silence ever had. When Lily noticed him, she scampered to his side, carrying the plate of strawberries cut into stars. "Look what Clara made," she said proudly. "She says food tastes better when it smiles." Ethan stared at the plate, then at his niece's glowing face. She had never run to him before with such unguarded joy. He glanced at Clara, who lowered her gaze modestly, as if apologizing for being seen. After breakfast, Lily ran off with her tutor, and Ethan asked Clara to stay. She hesitated, then clasped her hands in front of her apron, waiting. "I want to understand," Ethan said finally, his voice low. "How do you do this? She listens to you, trusts you, laughs with you. She barely speaks when it's—" Clara shook her head gently. "It isn't something I do. It's something I give. Children know when someone is present with them, not just near them. Lily doesn't need perfection. She needs presence." The words stung. Ethan's mind flickered to long evenings where he'd worked late, thinking tutors could fill the gaps. Presence. He had given her walls, structure, wealth. But presence? Never. "You talk as if it's easy," he muttered. Clara's eyes softened. "It's not. But it's necessary. I know what it feels like to be invisible in a full room." Her story unfolded more fully now. She told him how, after her parents' accident, she had lived briefly with relatives who treated her as an obligation. How birthdays passed without acknowledgement. How her report cards were glanced at but never celebrated. "I stopped asking for love," she admitted quietly. "And I promised myself if I ever saw that look in another child's eyes, I would do something, even if it was just sitting with them in the quiet." Ethan listened, the weight of her words pressing heavily on him. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about balance sheets or markets. He was thinking about a 10-year-old girl carrying invisible wounds, and about his niece carrying the same. "You're telling me you work here for—" He hesitated. "More than a paycheck?" Clara gave a faint smile. "I work because I need to live, but I stay because Lily needs to feel alive." The simplicity of it rattled him. That evening, when Lily resisted her lessons, Ethan lingered nearby instead of retreating to his study. He watched as Clara coaxed her gently back to the books with a silly song and a story about constellations. Lily's laughter bubbled through the halls again, and something inside Ethan cracked. His fortune had bought the tutor, the glossy textbooks, the mansion itself, but not the spark Clara ignited so effortlessly. Later, when the house was quiet, Ethan stood in the gallery lined with portraits of Hawthorne's past. They stared down at him, stern, powerful, untouchable. He thought of his father's mantra, "Control is strength, distance commands respect." Ethan had lived by it, and it had built him into a formidable man. But what good was control when a housekeeper, with nothing but patience and kindness, commanded a child's heart better than he ever could? Realization wasn't anger, it was guilt. He felt it settle deep, heavy and sharp, not because Clara had overstepped, but because she had succeeded where he had failed. The next day, he called her into his study. She stood nervously at the threshold, waiting for judgment. Instead, Ethan said, quietly, "You are not dismissed. In fact, you may be the only person in this house who's doing the job that matters." Clara blinked, stunned. "I don't understand." Ethan looked out the window, at the sprawling grounds, his hands clasped behind his back. "I built walls to keep chaos out, but in the process, I kept life out too. Last night, I realized this house hasn't been a home since my sister died, and somehow, you made it one again." Her eyes softened, her breath catching. "I didn't mean to take your place." He turned back to her, his voice rough. "You didn't take it. You reminded me I hadn't claimed it." Silence stretched, heavy and charged. Clara lowered her gaze, but Ethan felt something shift, not just in how he saw her, but in how he saw himself. For the first time in years, Ethan Hawthorne, the man who thought he had all the answers, recognized that perhaps the greatest lesson he would ever learn was being taught by the quiet housekeeper who sat at his piano and read stories to a lonely child. Ethan Hawthorne was not a man who yielded easily, least of all to emotions he didn't understand. After that morning in his study with Clara, A disquiet had taken root inside him. It was easier to dismiss deals, fire executives, restructure entire companies, than to face the quiet reality that his niece trusted someone else more than him. He told himself the solution was simple: reassert control. Put distance back where it belonged. So he tried. He kept his conversations with Clara brief, professional. Instructions were delivered with clipped precision, schedules reintroduced with the same rigor he applied to boardrooms. He reminded Lily about her tutoring hours, insisted on proper etiquette at the table, and returned to his study after meals instead of lingering where laughter might trap him. He believed that walls were safer. Yet every attempt to rebuild them cracked beneath Clara's presence. She never argued, never sought to undermine him. But when Lily's shoulders stiffened under the weight of his formality, Clara was there, slipping in with warmth that loosened the tension. When Lily's voice faltered while reciting a lesson, Clara knelt at her side, turning mistakes into games until confidence returned. Ethan watched all of it with a mix of irritation and reluctant awe. He could not deny what was plain. Where he brought structure, Clara brought life. Where his authority demanded obedience, her compassion invited trust. The contrast burned brightest one evening at dinner. It was a formal affair. His extended family gathered in the grand dining room. Crystal glasses gleamed under chandeliers, polished silverware set with quick talk from open ceremonies, and cousins, uncles, distant aunts, spoke in low voices laced with pride and envy. To Ethan, his uncle toasted, raising a glass, for closing the deal with the East Asian Consortium. Only you could bring such fortune to the Hawthorne name. Applause rippled around the table. Ethan inclined his head, the gesture practiced, though his eyes remained cool. Compliments never warmed him, they only affirmed expectations. But the murmurs that followed carried sharper edges. A pity, one cousin whispered, not quite softly enough, that for all his millions the house feels so cold. Money without heart. Another added under her breath, the poor child smiled more with the maid than with her own uncle. Ethan heard every word, his jaw tightened, his hand flexing around his wineglass. He didn't rise to gossip, never had. Silence had always been his shield, but tonight, silence felt heavier. Clara, standing discreetly behind Lily's chair, froze as well. Her instinct was to remain invisible. That was the role of staff at these dinners. Yet the sting in their words, the injustice of them, made something rise in her chest. "Forgive me," she said softly, surprising even herself as she stepped forward. "But perhaps the house feels different, because grief lingers longer than wealth." Her eyes flicked briefly toward Lily, then back at the table. "It is not a lack of heart. It is a heart learning how to beat again." The room fell into stunned silence. Every eye turned toward her. Servants did not speak at Hawthorne dinners, not unless spoken to. Clara's pulse thundered, but she stood steady, dignity radiating in her calm posture. Ethan looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time saw more than a housekeeper. He saw a woman who carried truth like armor, who dared to speak when silence was safer, not out of boldness, but out of care. His uncle cleared his throat awkwardly, raising his glass again. "To healing, then." The toast stumbled, conversation shifting clumsily to safer ground, but the moment lingered, heavy and unforgettable. Later that night, after guests departed and the house quieted, Ethan found Clara in the kitchen, washing dishes though others could have done it. She kept her eyes on the water, clearly bracing for reprimand. "You spoke out of turn," Ethan said, his voice low. "Sir," she replied, her tone steady though her hands trembled slightly. He should have reminded her of boundaries, of roles. Instead, he found himself saying, "But you weren't wrong." Clara looked up, startled. Their eyes met, silence stretching, charged. Ethan left before he said anything more, retreating to his study, where the echo of her words refused to leave him. It is not a lack of heart. It is a heart learning how to beat again. For the first time in years, Ethan wondered if perhaps his own had been beating wrong all along. The following week unfolded like a silent duel. Ethan returned to his patterns, closed doors, scheduled days, conversations limited to necessity. Clara, however, continued to move through the house with the same gentle steadiness, never seeking confrontation, yet never dimming the quiet warmth she gave to Lily. Ethan noticed everything. He noticed when Lily scraped her knee in the garden and ran past him, straight into Clara's arms. He noticed when Clara stitched a rip in Lily's stuffed rabbit with careful precision, and Lily cradled it afterward as if nothing had ever been broken. He noticed when Clara adjusted the thermostat before Lily's bedtime, ensuring her room wasn't too cold, something Ethan had never thought to check. These small acts pricked at him. He had built his life on grand gestures, multi-million-dollar donations, skyscrapers bearing the Hawthorne name, deals announced in headline. Yet none of those had made Lily smile the way a mended toy did. It wasn't just Lily. The staff, once stiff in Ethan's presence, softened when Clara was near. A cook smiled as she handed Clara an extra roll. A gardener thanked her for bringing water on a hot day. Respect followed her, unspoken but undeniable. One evening, Ethan lingered outside the playroom door, listening. Lily's laughter spilled out, mingling with Clara's softer tones. He pushed the door open quietly. Inside, Clara sat cross-legged on the rug, building a castle of blocks with Lily. She looked up, startled, then rose quickly, smoothing her apron. "I was just keeping her company until bedtime," Clara explained, as if preempting a reprimand. Ethan's gaze swept over the room, the blocks, the drawings scattered on the floor, the joy radiating from his niece. "You do more than keep her company," he said quietly. Clara frowned, unsure if it was criticism or acknowledgement. "If I overstep?" "You haven't," he interrupted, surprising them both. His voice softened. "I just notice." The words hung between them. Clara lowered her eyes, cheeks faintly flushed, then excused herself. Ethan remained, helping Lily stack the last blocks, though his hands were clumsy. His niece laughed at his crooked tower, and he let her, another small crack in the walls he had built. A few days later came another test. A charity gala, filled with relatives and society elites, hosted at the mansion. The halls glittered with chandeliers, the air thick with perfume and gossip. Ethan played his part, sharp suit, sharper tongue, his presence commanding, but even as he moved through the crowd, he was aware of Clara in the background, directing staff, ensuring everything ran smoothly. She blended into the scenery, yet her calm efficiency anchored the chaos. At one point, Ethan overheard a cluster of cousins speaking near the bar. "Ethan has fortune, yes," one said, "but no warmth. He's a statue, not a man. Poor Lily, growing up in this ice palace." Laughter followed, light but cutting. Ethan clenched his jaw, turning away before pride drove him to lash out. But Clara heard. She paused, tray in hand, her face tightening. Then, before she could stop herself, she spoke. "You may see a statue," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough to be heard, "but statues endure storms. Perhaps you mistake endurance." The cousins blinked, stunned, then flushed under her steady gaze. Ethan, watching from a distance, felt something stir inside him. Not humiliation, but an odd, disarming gratitude. Clara hadn't defended his wealth, his deals, his reputation. She had defended his endurance, the one thing no one had ever acknowledged as anything but coldness. Later, when the last guest departed, Ethan found her in the staff corridor. She braced herself, clearly expecting reproach. "You spoke out of turn again," he said, his voice low. "Sir," she answered, pins despite her nerves. He studied her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he said, "And yet, for reasons I don't understand, it mattered more than anything else I heard tonight." Clara blinked, caught off guard. He left before she could reply, retreating to his study, but when he sat down at his desk, he realized his world had shifted again. For the first time, Ethan no longer saw Clara as simply a housekeeper. He saw a woman whose dignity spoke louder than his wealth, whose compassion filled gaps his authority could not. And though he would not admit it, not even to himself, he found himself watching her differently now, as if she carried a light he hadn't realized his house had been missing all along. The night of the gala lingered in Ethan's mind longer than it should have. Clara's words, quiet but firm, echoed through him. "Perhaps you mistake endurance for absence. No one had ever defended him like that. Not in boardrooms, not in family circles, not even in the media. She had said it without thought of reward, as if compelled by something deep. But as the days passed, suspicion began to creep in. Ethan Hawthorne had not built his empire by trusting blindly. He had been burned before, partners who smiled in public and stole in private, associates who promised loyalty but sold secrets to rivals. Even family had proven treacherous. He had learned early that warmth could be a mask, that kindness was often the first move in manipulation. And now, Clara, who had no reason to stay past her duties, who gave his niece what even he could not. Why? He had heard her story, her pain, but part of him wondered if it was convenient, too perfectly aligned with Lily's needs. Was this humility genuine, or was it strategy? New thought plagued him until he could not ignore it. One evening, after Lily was asleep, Ethan sat in his study, files spread across his desk. He had quietly asked his private investigator, a man who usually vetted potential partners and competitors, to look into Clara's background. He told himself it was necessary, a safeguard. What if she was using Lily? What if her compassion hid darker motives? He couldn't risk it. The report arrived in a slim folder. Ethan flipped it open, scanning quickly. Clara Alvarez, age 26, no criminal record, no history of fraud or theft, but debts, medical bills from her late mother, student loans left unfinished when she dropped out of college to work, odd jobs across the years, diner waitress, receptionist, house cleaner. Then 3 years at a community shelter, mostly volunteer hours leading programs for children and teens. Notes from references described her as dependable, selfless. Ethan leaned back, the report in his hands. Debts, struggles, sacrifice, kindness that cost her more than it earned. Nothing damning, nothing manipulative. If anything, it painted a picture of someone who gave when she had nothing to spare. And yet, Ethan's chest tightened. He had invaded her privacy to learn what she would likely have told him if he had asked. Still, he wasn't ready to let go of suspicion. He remembered nights in his youth when his father had said, "Trust the story, not the storyteller." Everyone wants something. Ethan folded the file, setting it aside, telling himself it was only caution. But Clara found out. 2 days later, she entered his study, her face pale, her eyes stormy. She carried the folder in her hands, the investigator's seal still intact. Ethan's chest clenched. She must have found it where he'd left it in the drawer, or perhaps the investigator had been careless. Either way, she knew. "Is this what you think of me?" she asked, her voice low, shaking with restrained anger. Ethan rose slowly. "Clara, if you had me investigated." Her words cracked like glass. "You went through my life, my debts, my scars, like I'm some criminal waiting to be caught. After everything you've seen, after—" "Lily," her voice faltered, but she forced it steady. "You still think I'm here to take advantage of you?" Ethan's hands clenched at his sides. "I needed to be certain. I can't take risks with my niece." Clara's eyes blazed. "Certainty or control? You didn't ask me. You didn't trust me enough to let me tell you who I am. You treated me like a suspect." He swallowed hard, words caught in his throat. For once, the man who always had an answer had none. Clara stepped closer, her voice trembling now, thick with hurt. "I lost my parents. I lost my home. I have carried loneliness like a shadow every day since. And when I saw Lily, I saw myself. That's why I stayed. That's why I sang and read and held her when she cried. Not for money, not for your approval, because I promised a 10-year-old version of myself I'd never let another child feel forgotten." Her voice broke, tears burning in her eyes. "But you don't see that. You see a file, a risk, a threat." Ethan's chest constricted. He wanted to explain, to say it wasn't about her, it was about him, his scars, his past betrayals, but the truth cut deeper. It was about wealth. He had trusted money and suspicion more than people, and in doing so, he had repeated the same mistakes that had made his world so empty. "You are magical," he whispered, the words foreign on his tongue. Clara shook her head, tears slipping free. "It doesn't matter, because you'll never believe people like me can care without wanting something back." She dropped the folder on his desk with a sharp thud and walked out before he could stop her. Ethan stood in the silence she left behind, the weight of guilt pressing heavier than any deal gone wrong. For the first time in years, he felt not like a millionaire in control, but like a man who had broken something fragile and irreplaceable. The rest of the house felt heavier after Clara's departure from his study. Ethan moved through the halls with the report still echoing in his mind, every line of it turning from cold facts into echoes of her voice. Depths, yes, but depths paid for others, not for herself. Hours spent volunteering when she could have been clawing for extra shifts. A pattern of giving, again and again, with nothing to gain. And he had read those lines not as proof of her heart, but as ammunition for suspicion. Billy sensed the tension instantly. That evening she sat at the dinner table, pushing peas around her plate, glancing toward the doorway, as though waiting for Clara to appear. When Ethan asked her to eat, she pouted. Clara usually tells a story. It makes food taste. Words stung more than the untouched peas. Ethan found himself muttering, "Clara won't be joining us tonight," though he felt the hollowness of it as he said it. Later, in the quiet of his study, Ethan replayed Clara's confrontation. The way her voice had broken, the tears she hadn't tried to hide. She had trusted him with her truth, and he had responded with suspicion. He remembered his father's voice, "Trust the story, not the storyteller." But Clara's story had been right in front of him all along, in the way Lily laughed again, in the gentle steadiness she carried through his home. And instead of trusting, he had chosen to pry. The next day, Ethan tried to approach her in the corridor. Clara moved quickly, her eyes lowered, her words clipped. She performed her duties flawlessly, but the warmth that once softened every corner of his house was gone. For Lily, she still smiled, still read stories, still coaxed laughter. But when Ethan entered the room, she grew silent, her posture retreating into distance. It was as if she had pulled her light inward, leaving him in shadow. It unnerved him more than he cared to admit. That evening, restless, Ethan drove into the city. He told himself he needed distraction, but his car carried him to a part of town he hadn't visited in years. The community shelter where Clara had once volunteered stood modestly on a corner, its sign faded but welcoming. Children spilled out onto the steps, their laughter carrying into the street. Ethan stayed in his car, watching as volunteers guided them inside, offering coats, food, smiles. One of the staff recognized him and approached the window, startled by the sight of the famous Ethan Hawthorne parked outside. After a hesitant greeting, the man explained that Clara had once run weekend story hours here, sometimes working double shifts at other jobs just to afford bus fare. She never stopped showing up, the man said. Even when she had nothing, she gave. Ethan sat in silence long after the man left. Shame gnawed at him. He had dug into her past looking for flaws, but everywhere he looked he found only proof of her heart. Proof he hadn't trusted because it didn't come with a balance sheet. When he returned home, he found Clara in the library, reading to Lily by the fireplace. The child was curled against her, eyes drooping with sleep. Clara's voice was steady, but she didn't look up when Ethan entered. He said softly, kneeling beside the chair. "It's bedtime." She pouted. "One more chapter?" Clara promised. Clara closed the book gently. "Tomorrow, little one." She lifted Lily and carried her upstairs, her steps measured, her eyes carefully avoiding his. When she returned, Ethan stood waiting. The silence stretched until finally he spoke. "Clara, I owe you an apology." Her hands tightened on the book she still held. "You don't owe me words, Mr. Hawthorne. You owe yourself honesty." And the "owe yourself honesty." Her quiet firmness left him breathless. He wanted to argue, to defend his choices as protection, but the truth was too sharp to deny. He had treated kindness as weakness, compassion as risk, and in doing so, he had betrayed the only person who had made his house a home. "I don't know how to undo this," he admitted, his voice rough. Clara met his eyes for the first time that day. "Then start by seeing people, not files. Start by believing that some of us care because we've known what it means to be uncared for." The words lodged deep in him. She walked past before he could reply, leaving him alone with the ache of realization. That night, Ethan lay awake, the sound of rain against the windows. For the first time in years, deals and numbers didn't fill his thoughts. Instead, he saw Clara, standing with fire in her eyes, telling him he had broken trust. He understood then that the greatest wealth he had ever been offered was not his fortune, but the gift of her presence. And he had nearly thrown it away. The storm didn't come from inside the mansion this time. It came from the headlines. One crisp morning, Ethan's cousin, Leonard Hawthorne, leaned back in his office chair and smiled as he scrolled through the article he had leaked. For months he had watched Ethan grow closer to the quiet housekeeper, and it infuriated him. Leonard had long believed he was the rightful heir to more influence in the family estate, and Clara's presence threatened that. All it took was one whispered phone call to a journalist and the story spread like wildfire. By afternoon, the newspapers screamed with scandal. Scheming Maid targets millionaire fortune. Tabloids plastered Clara's face across glossy covers, her debts and personal struggles laid bare for the world to feast on. Her student loans, her mother's hospital bills, even the jobs she had taken in desperation, all twisted into a tale of ambition, painted as proof she was climbing toward Ethan's wealth through Orders swarmed the gates of the Hawthorne estate, cameras flashing, voices shouting, "Clara, are you in love with your employer? How much are you hoping to inherit? Did you plan this from the start?" Clara's world tilted beneath her. She had given her heart in quiet ways, through stories, music, mended toys, and now strangers laughed at her picture in tabloids, calling her a gold digger, a manipulator. She couldn't step outside without cameras in her face. When she ran errands, customers at the market whispered. A neighbor muttered, "So it's true." In the mansion, the staff avoided eye contact, torn between pity and fear. Clara's hands trembled when she folded laundry, her chest tightening with humiliation. She had lived her life with dignity, even when it meant working 2 jobs to survive. And now, that dignity was being ripped apart in public. Ethan knew. He had read the headlines, seen the swarm of photographers, heard the questions shouted outside his gates. In his study, he paced, torn. His instinct told him to stay silent. Silence had always been his weapon, the way he outlasted storms. He thought that if he ignored the noise, it would die down. But in this storm, silence was. And Clara noticed. She passed him in the hall one evening, the article still burning in her mind. He opened his mouth to speak, but said nothing. That silence struck harder than any insult. She looked at him with wounded eyes, her voice trembling. "You don't believe them, do you?" Ethan froze, torn between pride and guilt. His hesitation was enough. Clara turned away before tears could betray her. For the first time since she had stepped into the mansion, she felt utterly alone. That night, Clara packed slowly, her hands trembling as she folded the simple clothes she had brought into the mansion months ago. Each piece felt like a reminder of the whispers now spreading through the city. She paused when she picked up Lily's stuffed rabbit, the one she had stitched back together, and her heart cracked. She had stayed because of Lily, because the child needed warmth, but what good was warmth if scandal poisoned it? She moved quietly through the halls, hoping to leave unseen. But Lily caught her in the foyer, clutching the hem of her dress. "Where are you going, Clara? It's bedtime." "You promised." Clara knelt, forcing a smile as tears blurred her vision. "Sweetheart, I have to go for a while, but you'll be okay." "You?" Lily whispered fiercely, shaking her head. "Not without you." Ethan appeared then, drawn by the voices. He froze at the sight of Clara's suitcase by the door, his niece clinging to her. The silence between him and Clara was louder than any storm outside. Her eyes met his, filled with anguish. "You could have defended me, just once. You could have told them I wasn't what they said. But you said nothing." Ethan's chest tightened, guilt clawing at him, but his words came too late. Clara kissed Lily's forehead, pried herself gently free, and lifted the suitcase. As the door closed behind her, Lily sobbed in Ethan's arms, her small voice breaking through the silence. "You let her go." Ethan stood in the vast, empty foyer, the weight of his silence crushing him. For the first time in his life, he realized that money and walls couldn't shield him from the truth. He had failed not in business, but in love, in trust, in the one thing Clara had offered freely. And now, she was gone. The days after Clara's departure were filled with a silence heavier than any storm. Ethan's mansion, already cavernous, now felt like a mausoleum. Lily grew withdrawn again, her laughter gone, her steps slower. She asked for Clara constantly, each question cutting deeper into Ethan's chest. He answered as best he could, but guilt laced every word. He had let her go. Outside, the tabloids only grew more vicious. Stories painted Clara as a manipulator, a gold digger who had nearly trapped one of the wealthiest men in the city. Photos of her leaving the mansion with her suitcase filled the gossip columns. The words schemer and maid with ambition followed her name like chains. Then, one night, everything changed. It began with a short clip uploaded anonymously to social media. The footage was grainy, clearly taken by a member of the staff with a phone. It showed a moment from weeks earlier, Lily in the throes of a panic attack, her small body trembling, gasping for breath, her cries echoing in the hall. The camera wavered, then focused as Clara rushed forward, kneeling beside her. "Look at me, sweetheart," Clara whispered in the video, her arms wrapping protectively around Lily. "You're safe, breathe with me. In and out. That's it. I've got you. Nothing will hurt you here." The clip showed Clara shielding Lily with her own body, her hands stroking the child's back, her calm voice steady even as the girl sobbed into her chest. Slowly, Lily's breathing evened, her small fists unclenching as Clara rocked her gently, humming a lullaby. It was not the image of a schemer, it was the image of a protector. A guardian, a woman giving everything of herself to a child who wasn't even her own. Within hours, the video spread across platforms, retweeted, shared, stitched with commentary. The narrative shifted almost instantly. "She's no gold digger, she's a saint." "Look at how she protects that little girl," I said, pointing. "Those tabloids owe her an apology. Money doesn't buy this kind of love." The Protect Clara trended worldwide within a day. People began sharing their own stories of teachers, neighbors, and caregivers who had shown them kindness beyond obligation. Clara became a symbol, not of scandal, but of selfless love. Ethan saw the clip late at night, alone in his study. At first, he couldn't breathe. He remembered that day, remembered hearing from the nanny that Lily had been unsettled, but never knowing how severe it had been. And Clara had been there, not because she had to be, but because she refused to let a child suffer alone. The image seared into him. Clara, steady, unshaken, carrying the weight of his niece's fear as though it were her own. He pressed a hand over his eyes, shame burning. While the world defended her, while strangers saw her truth, he had chosen silence. He had let her stand alone against the storm, even as she had shielded his family. For the first time, Ethan admitted the depth of his failure. His wealth had made him powerful, but powerless where it mattered most. Clara had given the lead what even he, with all his resources, could not: safety, warmth, home. The next morning, Ethan made a decision. No more silence, no more walls. He called his assistant and demanded a press conference. Within hours, the media gathered at the Hawthorne estate, expecting denial, spin, or further scandal. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward as Ethan stepped onto the podium in front of the mansion gates. He stood tall, but his face carried a gravity the press had rarely seen. His voice, when it came, was clear, unguarded. "You've all read the stories about Clara Alvarez," he began. "You've seen the headlines, the accusations, the insinuations. Many of you repeated them, and I stayed silent." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Ethan continued. "And was my greatest mistake, because Clara is not who the tabloids claimed. Clara is the woman who sat at my niece's side when grief silenced her. Clara is the woman who shielded her through panic and tears. Clara gave my home something I never could. She gave it warmth, she gave it love." He paused, his voice tightening. "I am a man who built walls. Clara is a woman who made those walls mean something again. And for that, she deserves respect, not ridicule." Cameras clicked furiously. Journalists scribbled, stunned at his candor. Ethan's next words were softer, but carried through the microphones. "If you want a story, here it is. A millionaire learned that fortune means nothing without people like Clara Alvarez. And I will spend the rest of my life proving she is not only worthy of this house, but of my respect, my gratitude, and more." The press conference ended in stunned silence before erupting into questions, but Ethan stepped back, refusing to say more. He had spoken the truth. The world could do what it wanted with it. By evening, headlines had flipped. Ethan Hawthorne defends Clara. She gave my home love. Clips of his speech spread alongside the viral video. Public opinion surged. The same outlets that had mocked her now scrambled to retract. Clara's name trended again, but this time with admiration. The world's response was immediate and overwhelming. For every cruel headline that once painted Clara as a schemer, a dozen new stories rose to honor her compassion. Morning talk shows replayed the viral video, hosts tearing up as they described the way she had shielded Lily. Comment sections, once filled with ridicule, overflowed with apologies and admiration. She's the definition of grace. Evolian wear capes, some wear aprons. Hope Ethan Hawthorne knows he doesn't deserve her. Even celebrities and influencers joined the chorus, tagging Protect Clara in solidarity. Donations poured into the community shelter she once worked at, strangers calling it a tribute to the kind of woman Clara is. Meanwhile, Clara kept to herself. She avoided interviews, stayed away from cameras, and tried to live quietly in her modest apartment, but the world wouldn't let her disappear. Neighbors slipped notes under her door, thanking her for inspiring them. Parents brought children by the cafe where she sometimes worked shifts, asking if she might say hello. The attention embarrassed her, but she accepted it with humility, reminding herself that it wasn't about her, it was about the message. Back at the mansion, Ethan watched the tide turn with a mix of relief and regret. He had spoken the truth, but his words couldn't erase the silence that came before them. Every time he saw Lily clutching the stuffed rabbit Clara had mended, every time the child asked when Clara was coming back, Ethan felt the weight of his choices. He had defended her too late. One evening, Ethan stood in Lily's room as she prepared for bed. She looked at him with wide eyes, her voice small. "Uncle Ethan, why doesn't Clara live here anymore? You told everyone she's good. Why isn't she here?" The question pierced him. He knelt beside her, brushing her hair back gently. "Because I made a mistake," he admitted softly. "I didn't stand up for her when I should have. And sometimes, when you hurt someone, they need space before they can come back." Lily frowned, hugging her rabbit. "But we need her." Ethan's throat tightened. "I know, and I'll do everything I can to make it right." The next morning, he drafted letters, not business memos, not legal contracts, but personal apologies. One to Clara, left unsigned because he didn't know if she would read it. Another to the staff, acknowledging that he had failed them by letting the mansion become a place of suspicion instead of trust. But he knew letters weren't enough. Words had weight, yes, but action built trust. He began with Lily. Ethan rearranged his schedule, setting aside evenings just for her. At first, their time together was awkward. He wasn't sure how to read stories or play games, but he tried. He burned dinner once, attempting to cook with her. He built towers that collapsed under his clumsy hands, yet each effort pulled a laugh from her, small but genuine. It wasn't the same as Clara's effortless warmth, but it was a beginning. The press noticed his change, reporting on the visible shift in how he carried himself. No longer the distant millionaire, Ethan appeared with Lily at community events, donating not just money, but time. He visited the shelter Clara had once worked at, quietly writing a check to keep its programs alive. Still, the question lingered everywhere he went. Where is Clara? One afternoon, Ethan stood outside the cafe where she now worked, the bell above the door ringing as he entered. Clara looked up from behind the counter, startled, her posture tensing. Conversations around them hushed as patrons recognized him. Hi, Gave, Amir called out. She filled his glance, hearing herself talk on it. "I'm here because the world saw what I should have seen all along." Clara's lips parted, but she said nothing. Her silence was louder than the buzz of whispers around them. He set a hand gently on the counter, his voice steady. "Clara, you gave Lily a home when I couldn't, and you gave me a truth I was too blind to see. I don't ask for forgiveness now, only the chance to earn it." The cafe was silent, the weight of his words filling the room. Clara lowered her gaze, her heart warring with the memory of betrayal. She wanted to believe him, but trust wasn't a switch to be flipped. Finally, she spoke. Words are easy, Mr. Hawthorne. Living them is harder. Ethan nodded once. Then let me live them. He left without pressing further, without asking her to return that night. For the first time in his life, he understood that real redemption was not demanded, it was proven. As he walked back into the city, cameras trailing him, he felt something shift inside. The viral video had changed the world's view of Clara, but more importantly, it had changed him. Ethan Hawthorne, who had built his empire on silence and control, now understood that his future, his family's future, depended not on walls but on the courage to love as freely as Clara had. The rain began just as Ethan reached the edge of the city. Sheets of water blurred the street lamps, turning the pavement into rivers of light. He parked near the small apartment building he had been told Clara had moved into, a modest brick structure with peeling paint, nothing like the marble halls he had once watched her move silently through. He stood there for a moment, the storm pelting down, before forcing himself forward. The umbrella he had brought stayed folded at his side. He didn't want to be shielded tonight. He wanted her to see him stripped of the walls he had always hidden behind. Her apartment window glowed faintly on the second floor. He could see her shadow moving, quiet and alone. His throat tightened at the sight. Clara had always belonged to places filled with warmth, with laughter. Seeing her alone in a tiny apartment after everything she had given tore at something inside him. He knocked on the door, his knuckles sharp against the wood. For a long moment there was nothing. Then the door opened just slightly and Clara appeared, her eyes widening when she saw him standing drenched in the downpour. "Mr. Hawthorne," she said softly, surprise and guardedness in her voice. "Why are you here?" "Because I can't stay away any longer," he said, his voice rough with rain and emotion. She hesitated, opening the door wider but not fully. "You shouldn't be here. People will talk. They always do." "Let them," Ethan answered. "I'm done living by silence." The storm thundered around them, but his voice cut through, steady and desperate. "Clara, I came to ask for forgiveness. Not because you worked for me, not because of what you did for Lily, but because I failed you. I failed to see that your strength was greater than anything I had ever built." Her eyes shimmered with conflict. She shook her head. "You think words can undo what you did? You stood silent when the world tore me apart. You let them call me names I never deserved. You let me walk out that door." Ethan stepped closer, the rain streaming down his face, his suit plastered to his skin. "I know, and I will regret it for the rest of my life. But I am not here with excuses. I'm here with proof." She frowned. "Proof?" He reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded document, already damp from the storm. "I filed a statement with the board and the family trust. I've named you publicly as the one person who restored this house, who gave Lily what I couldn't. And I've warned them, anyone who continues to spread lies about you will face me, even if it costs me every ally I have." Clara's lips parted, her breath catching. "You'd risk your reputation, your family's approval. For me?" "Truth," Ethan corrected softly. "And for you, because I don't admire you for the meals you cooked or the halls you cleaned. I admire you because you were braver than I ever was, because you carried strength without armor, because you loved Lily, and even me, when I gave you every reason not to." The storm surged, lightning splitting the sky, the thunder rolling like the echo of his words. Claire's hands trembled on the doorframe. "Surely," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I can't just forget the betrayal. Do you know how it felt? To give everything I had, and to be treated like I was nothing more than a file? In a drawer?" His chest clenched. He nodded slowly. "I know, and I don't ask you to forget. I only ask you to see me trying to be different. To see me willing to stand in the rain until you believe I mean every word." The silence between them stretched, filled only by the sound of rain drumming against the pavement. Clara's tears mingled with the storm as she shook her head, torn between anger and longing. "Finally," she whispered, "I never wanted your wealth, Ethan. I never wanted your mansion or your fortune. All I ever wanted was to belong, to be seen, to be trusted." His breath caught, the raw truth of her words piercing deeper than any accusation ever could. He stepped closer, his voice fierce yet tender. "Then let me give you that. Not because I pity you, not because I need you for Lily, but because I can't imagine a life without the strength you bring into it. I don't want riches without you. I want a home with you." Clara's walls, built from betrayal and hurt, began to crack. Her hands loosened on the doorframe, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and hope. "Ethan," she whispered again, her voice trembling. "If you fail me again—" "I won't," he interrupted, his voice breaking. "Not this time, not ever." And then, through the storm, Clara stepped out from the doorway, her tears joining the rain as she fell into his arms. The embrace was not delicate. It was raw, desperate, two people clinging as though the storm itself might tear them apart. Rain soaked Clara's braid until it clung to her shoulders, plastered Ethan's hair to his forehead, but neither cared. For the first time, the walls between them had shattered, and what remained was unbearably human. "What are you doing here?" I asked. Determined to hold on to her, Ethan whispered against her hair. "But I swear to you, I will spend every day proving that I can be the man you and Lily need." Clara pulled back slightly, her eyes glistening, her hand still pressed against his chest, as if testing the sincerity of the heartbeat beneath. "You broke me, Ethan. You let them call me things I wasn't. Do you understand how hard it is to stand here now?" His voice cracked. "I do, and if you tell me to walk away, I will. But know this, whether you forgive me or not, you will never stand alone again. I will fight for you, even if it's from a distance." The words were not polished like his boardroom speeches. They were jagged, clumsy, real. And for Clara, that was what made them pierce deeper than any grand promise. A soft voice broke through the storm. "Clara?" They turned to see Lily standing under the awning, clutching her rabbit. Ethan's driver must have brought her, unable to stop her insistence on coming. Her small eyes were wide, fear and hope tangled in them. "Is she coming home?" Clara's breath caught. She knelt, rain dripping from her lashes as she opened her arms. Lily ran into them, burying her face against Clara's soaked shoulder. The child's sobs were muffled, but Ethan heard the words, broken but clear. "Don't leave me again." Clara kissed the top of her head, her tears spilling freely now. "I never wanted to. I just didn't think I belonged." Ethan crouched beside them, his hand settling gently on Lily's back. "You do," he said, his voice trembling. "You both do. More than I can ever say." For a long time they stayed like that. A millionaire, a housekeeper, and a child, bound not by fortune or duty, but by the raw, unshakable truth that they needed one another. The storm raged, but within their small circle of embrace, there was something stronger than thunder. There was belonging. Finally, Clara lifted her head, meeting Ethan's gaze. Her voice was soft but resolute. "If I come back, it will not be as a servant. I cannot survive that again. I need to know I am more than someone you employ." Ethan's answer came without hesitation. "You are more. You always were. You will come back not as staff but as family. As the woman who changed everything I thought I knew about strength. As the one I—" He faltered, his throat tightening. "As the one I love?" The words startled them both. Ethan Hawthorne, who had once thought love a weakness, had spoken it aloud. Clara's lips parted, her hand trembling as she cupped his cheek. "Say it again," she whispered, needing to believe. His eyes locked onto hers, unflinching despite the storm around them. "I love you, Clara Alvarez, not for what you did for Lily, not for what you gave this house. I love you for the woman you are, for the strength that humbles me, for the heart that saved me." Clara's tears mingled with the rain as a sob escaped her lips. Then, finally, her defenses broke completely, and she kissed him. It was not tentative, it was fierce, years of longing and pain crashing into a single moment. Lily clapped her small hands together, giggling through her tears. "She's coming home," she whispered to her rabbit. "She's really coming home." The storm began to ease, the thunder rolling farther away, the rain softening into a steady patter. But for Ethan, Clara, and Lily, the world had already shifted. When they finally rose, Ethan draped his jacket around Clara's shoulders despite its dampness, his arms steady around her as though he feared she might disappear. Together, they walked back toward the waiting car, Lily skipping between them, her hand in Clara's. Ethan glanced down at the woman beside him, her hair damp, her eyes shining with exhaustion and hope. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like the master of a mansion or the heir to a fortune. He felt like a man who had finally found the only wealth worth holding on to. Clara leaned lightly against him as they walked. Her voice was barely audible over the rain, but he heard it. "All I ever wanted was a place to belong." Ethan pressed a kiss to her temple, his voice steady, certain. "Then let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never question that again." 1 year later, the Hawthorne estate was almost unrecognizable. The stone walls and polished glass still stood, but something deeper had changed. Laughter drifted through the corridors, music spilled from the once silent piano, and fresh flowers bloomed in every room. It was no longer a house of echoes. It was a home. Ethan Hawthorne walked through the hall one morning, pausing by the grand staircase where Lily sat on the steps, braiding ribbons into her rabbit's ears, while Clara guided her patient fingers. Clara looked up, her smile meeting Ethan's eyes like sunlight, and in that instant, he realized how far they had come. A year ago, he had stood drenched in a storm, begging for forgiveness. Now, forgiveness had bloomed into something stronger: family. He and Clara had married quietly, without the grand spectacle society expected of him. The ceremony was small, attended by close friends, a few trusted family members, and the staff who had long been the backbone of his house. No gilded ballroom, no paparazzi. Only vows whispered under an arch of wildflowers in the garden, with Lily grinning as she scattered petals down the aisle. For the first time, Ethan hadn't cared what the world thought. The only world that mattered was standing with him beneath that arch. Life afterward was not about grandeur. Ethan still commanded his empire, but he no longer allowed it to consume him. He ended his workdays earlier, keeping evenings sacred for family. Weekends were spent not in boardrooms, but in backyards and libraries, reading stories, tending gardens, laughing with Clara and Lily. Balanced, once a foreign concept, had become his anchor. Clara, too, had found her purpose blossoming beyond the walls of the mansion. With Ethan's support, she launched the Alvarez Foundation, dedicated to providing homes and education for orphaned and vulnerable children. Her past, once a shadow, became the light guiding her mission. She poured herself into the work, visiting shelters, speaking with children, mentoring young volunteers. Ethan watched her with awe, realizing she carried the strength of two lives: the girl who had known loneliness and the woman who turned it into compassion. Her fortune made it possible, she told him one evening as they sat together, reviewing plans for a new shelter wing. "Deal," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to her hand. "Your vision made it real. My fortune just followed your lead." The city began to see him differently too. No longer just the stoic tycoon, Ethan Hawthorne became known for his philanthropy, his dedication to programs inspired by Clara's past. Headlines shifted from scandal to admiration. Hawthorne Empire Funds for Orphans. From silence to strength. A family's legacy? But the greatest change was always within the mansion itself. Where once the halls had echoed with cold formality, they now rang with warmth. Lily thrived in the new atmosphere, her laughter no longer a rarity but a daily melody. She played piano with Clara, painted messy canvases with Ethan, and often declared with childish certainty, "We're a real family now." Ethan would look at Clara then, his heart swelling with gratitude. She had been right all along. Worth was not measured in money, but in presence, in the quiet, unspoken choice to love and to stay. One evening, the family hosted a modest dinner for colleagues and friends. It was not the grand galas of the past, but a gathering filled with warmth and sincerity. Guests remarked on how different the estate felt, how it no longer intimidated but welcomed. But change is often tested. During the dinner, a guest, a businessman's wife with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, commented on one of the new maids, a young woman with plain clothes and nervous hands. The guest's voice carried just enough to be heard by those nearby. "Honestly, Ethan, for all your fortune, couldn't you hire staff who at least look the part? She looks as if she came straight from the street." The young maid froze, her face flushed with humiliation as whispers rippled. Old memories flickered through Clara's chest. The sting of being judged, mocked for her uniform, dismissed because she didn't glitter. She rose from her seat, her presence quiet but commanding. Clara walked to the maid, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder, then turned to the guest, her voice gentle but firm. "Worth is never worn," she said. "It's lived, and if you take the time to see her heart, you'll find it shines brighter than any gown." The room fell silent. The maid's eyes shimmered with gratitude. The guest flushed, lowering her gaze, embarrassed by the truth laid bare. Ethan's heart swelled as he watched Clara, the same woman who had once been mocked in his halls, now standing tall as the mistress of the house, defending dignity with the grace of someone who had lived without it. He rose, walking to her side, slipping his hand into hers. His smile was quiet, reverent. In that moment, Ethan realized that this was the legacy he wanted to leave behind. Not towers of steel, not bank accounts overflowing with numbers, but a home where no one felt small. A legacy of love and belonging, born not from his fortune, but from Clara's strength. After the dinner, when the guests had gone and the staff cleared the last of the dishes, Ethan and Clara lingered in the garden. Lanterns hung from the trees, their glow soft against the night sky. Lily chased fireflies with her rabbit tucked under one arm, her laughter carrying through the air. Ethan slipped his arm around Clara's waist, drawing her close. "Do you know what I thought when you spoke tonight?" Clara tilted her head, her eyes warm. "That I overstepped?" He shook his head with a faint smile. "I thought, that's the woman who saved me." She leaned against him, the scent of roses around them. "You didn't need saving, Ethan. You just needed to remember you had a heart." He chuckled softly. "Then you reminded me, every day since." They stood in silence, watching Lily twirl in the grass, her joy unburdened now. For Ethan, it was a picture of everything he had once thought impossible. Peace, laughter, love, all coexisting under one roof. The mansion itself reflected that transformation. The cold marble halls had been softened with color, with art painted by children from Clara's foundation displayed proudly on the walls. The grand piano, once untouched, now sang with music daily, sometimes Clara's gentle playing, sometimes Lily's hesitant notes. Even Ethan had learned a few chords, clumsy but eager, encouraged by the two people who had taught him the value of trying. Outside the mansion, their legacy grew wider. Clara's foundation expanded to several shelters, each one carrying her quiet philosophy. Home is not a place of wealth, but a place of welcome. Ethan supported every effort, not just financially but with his presence. He attended openings, met children, shook hands with staff. People were stunned to see the once distant tycoon kneeling to tie a child's shoelace or helping set tables in a sheltered dining room. When asked why, Ethan always gave the same answer: "Because Clara showed me fortune is meant to serve, not to be served." And Clara, in turn, never let the spotlight shift from the mission. "We are here," she would tell the cameras, "for the children who need to be seen, not overlooked." Their partnership became a balance of empire and compassion, of strength and humility. They were not perfect. Ethan still struggled with pride, Clara still wrestled with old wounds of mistrust, but together, they found healing in each step forward. One afternoon, nearly a year after their marriage, Ethan found himself walking the halls alone, reflecting. He paused at the library door, where laughter bubbled. Inside, Clara sat with a group of children from the foundation, reading aloud. Lily was perched beside her, proudly turning the pages. Ethan watched unseen for a moment. It struck him then that the true measure of his fortune was not the empire outside these walls, but the warmth within them. The woman who had once been dismissed as just a maid had become his compass, his anchor, his home. That evening, as the family gathered for supper, Ethan raised a glass. Clara looked at him curiously, Lily giggling beside her. "To family," he said simply. "Not the one we're born into, but the one we build." Clara's smile softened, her eyes glistening. Lily raised her cup of juice in imitation. "To family," she echoed, her voice bright. And in that simple toast, Ethan felt the circle complete. Weeks later, the mansion hosted another dinner, this time for children from Clara's foundation. The halls rang with laughter and the patter of small feet. It was in that moment, surrounded by the sound of life, that Ethan realized the final truth. Legacy wasn't built in marble and glass. Legacy was built in love lived daily, in dignity defended, in the quiet courage to open one's heart. As the night ended, Clara stood at the doorway, bidding farewell to guests. A young boy tugged at her sleeve, whispering shyly, "This place feels like home." Clara knelt, her eyes shining as she smoothed his hair. "That's because it is." Ethan watched her from across the hall, pride swelling in his chest. He thought of the night he had first come home early, expecting silence and finding music instead. That night had changed everything, and now, standing in the house filled with laughter, he knew he had found not just redemption, but purpose. Later, as the lights dimmed and the house grew quiet again, Ethan and Clara walked hand in hand through the grand foyer. Clara paused beneath the chandelier, her voice soft. "Do you ever think about how it began?" Ethan's lips curved. "Every day, and every day I thank the storm that brought me back early." Clara smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "And I thank the silence that finally broke." They climbed the stairs together, Lily already asleep upstairs, the house warm with echoes of joy. For the first time in his life, Ethan Hawthorne felt the certainty of a legacy worth leaving behind. Not wealth, not power, but a home where worth was lived, not worn. And beside him, Clara, the woman who had once been mocked and misunderstood, now stood as the heart of it all.